everybody, and welcome to Spark of Vintage. Today, I'm participating in the Sonnet's Garden Blooms Spring into DIY Challenge. We were given the opportunity to select any projects that we wanted to make as long as it had a spring fling feel. So I'm glad that you're here, and let's get started. This piece out of my stash was found at the Goodwill bins, and it was the wood beads that really appealed to me. I primed the piece with Fusion Mineral Paint's Chateau White. It took 2 coats of Chateau from Fusion Mineral Paint to cover up all of the writing on the sign. Once I was satisfied with the coat, I did a quick dry with my heat gun, and then I pulled out my Prima Marketing transfers in Blossom Bunnies that just came out this spring. This transfer set is absolutely adorable, not only for springtime, but for year-round. The graphics are bright and gorgeous, and I thought they lent themselves really well to this project. What I didn't capture on camera was that I also painted each one of the wood beads individually with a different color that coordinated with all of the different colors in the Prima Marketing transfers. For project 2, I pulled out another one of the signs that I had in my stash from the Goodwill bins. I particularly liked this one because it had a hanger on it already intact, so it could be a shelf sitter or you could hang it up. It did take 3 coats of the Fusion Mineral Paint in order to cover up that black bold lettering. I also pulled out my Prima Marketing mold called Easter wreaths that came out last spring and used that to pour a few resin Easter eggs. I took the resin eggs and painted them in 3 different colors, actually using 3 different paints. Usually I like to prep my resin with a little bit of gesso in order to help that paint stick a little bit better and give it some tooth. But I knew that paints like the Fusion Mineral Paint and the Buttermilk Yellow, as well as the DIY chalk paint, had a great deal of foundational piece to it and that the paint would stick pretty easily. I also used Speckled Egg Blue from Tim Holtz's Distress line. It also gave excellent coverage, and I felt like the eggs were going to be a great addition to my bunny sign. I particularly like the natural wood look of this frame, and the transfer that I selected from the Prima Marketing Blossom Bunnies was a group of little rabbits in the carrot patch. And I felt like the naturalness of the wood as well as the rusticness of the bunnies were a great match together. I applied the transfers just like any other transfer with a rub-on tool. But again, you have to be gentle and careful. I also noticed with the Fusion Mineral Paint that the Fusion Mineral Paint will grab transfers really well. So you may not have a lot of lifting up and down time on your transfers. So make sure you trim them closely and get it right the first time. Once the paint was dry on the resin eggs and my transfers had been applied, burnished, and sealed, I went ahead and took some heavy body gel from Prima Marketing's Finnabar Art Alchemy collection and applied the resin eggs to the project. You might be able to see in the picture that the transfer is just a little short for the size of the picture frame. So those resin eggs did a great job of filling in a couple of the gaps and actually look like they naturally belong there. This poor little flower bucket was in desperate need of a spring makeover. I felt like the transfer itself was way overfaded and the black color just didn't lend itself to spring. So the transfer, to point out, did fuse to the paint, so I did have to get out my straight edge razor and scrape pretty hard in order to get some of that ooey gooey old transfer off the front. I turned to my old friend Fusion Mineral Paints Chateau White in order to create a couple of coats of white on this very dark black paint. I knew I wanted to paint it a lighter green, and I didn't really want the darkness of that black bleeding through. So I gave it, I think, 3 coats of the Chateau in order to give it full coverage. After all 3 layers of the Chateau had enough time to dry, I used Fusion's Carriage House green paint in order to put on my final 2 coats. I felt that the green was a very soft spring color and would make an excellent background for the transfer that I would be using on the front of the flower bucket. That paint went on smooth and easy after those primer coats with the Chateau paint. Once the Fusion paint had dried and I had painted the inside of the bucket as well as the bottom and the back of the piece, I was ready to apply my transfer. This transfer I selected out of IOD's seed catalog transfers. This is one of my favorite transfers that IOD has, and I have used it on several other pieces that have been really successful in my booth. Had to be a little careful with this transfer because, again, our piece is curved, so we want to make sure we take the time to really be careful with how we apply the transfer so that we don't wrinkle it or crack it or disconnect the letters so that we break up the messaging. So I worked from the middle of the piece outwards, again, slowly rubbing as well as smoothing it with my thumb as I went along, and everything came out great. I did a quick seal on the piece with a matte varnish so as not to make it too shiny and keep the vintage look. I got lucky and scored this gorgeous little cart in the Goodwill bins just a couple of weeks ago. It didn't really need that much work. It just needed a little bit of freshening up and a fresh coat of paint. I already liked the colors that were on it, but I wanted to change those flowers just a little bit and make them look a little more vintagey and modern. I had a couple of extra flowers in my stash from a resin pour I did a couple of years ago, and I thought they would be a great addition to the cart since they mimic the flowers that were previously on there, and I wanted to keep the same kind of color scheme. I first applied some heavy white gesso from Finnabar in order to make the resin sticky enough to hold the paint. And then I painted the stems green with Carriage House and painted the flowers pink from Dilutions paint from Diane Reevely. It's a bright, happy, poppy, peony pink that I thought went great with the carriage. I applied the flowers with heavy body gel, and I felt they gave it a great, perfect pop for this delightful little wagon. Thank you for joining us at SparkofVintage, and we'll see you next week.